The harder you try to force life to work, the more exhausted you become, because some things only begin flowing the moment you finally stop fighting them. There comes a point where you become tired of chasing peace, tired of chasing clarity, tired of trying so hard to fix every thought, control every emotion, and force your life to finally feel calm. And the strange thing is, the harder you chase peace emotionally, the further away it seems to become, because peace cannot fully exist inside a mind that is constantly fighting itself. Most people think peace is something they must achieve through more effort, so they pressure themselves constantly. They try harder to stop overthinking. They force themselves to stay positive. They desperately search for answers, signs, certainty, and control. But instead of becoming calmer, their mind becomes even more exhausted. And this is where the hidden problem begins, because the mind starts treating peace like another goal to chase aggressively. And once that happens, even calmness becomes stressful. You start analyzing every emotion. You start questioning every thought. You start trying to control your internal state every second. And slowly, your entire inner world becomes tense. That is why many people feel emotionally drained even when nothing major is happening externally. Their exhaustion is not only coming from life, it is coming from the constant internal pressure they are creating inside themselves. The pressure to always feel okay. The pressure to always know what to do. The pressure to immediately solve uncertainty, and that pressure creates resistance, because the mind was never designed to live in constant emotional force. The harder you grip peace, the more restless your mind becomes. The harder you force certainty, the more anxiety appears. The harder you chase emotional control, the more unstable everything feels internally. And eventually, you begin realizing something important. Maybe the problem was never that peace was absent. Maybe the problem was that your mind never stopped fighting long enough to experience it, because peace is not created through desperation. It appears when internal resistance begins dissolving. Think about how often your mind creates suffering by arguing with reality. You resist where you are in life. You resist how long healing is taking. You resist uncertainty. You resist difficult emotions. And this constant resistance keeps your nervous system trapped in tension. Even when you are physically resting, mentally you are still running, still chasing, still forcing, still trying to make life move according to fear and urgency. But life does not always respond to emotional pressure. Some things unfold naturally only after the mind stops gripping them so tightly. And this is why many breakthroughs happen after people finally let go mentally. Not because they stopped caring, but because they stopped creating resistance through constant force. Suddenly, the mind becomes quieter. Breathing feels lighter. Thoughts slow down, and awareness returns. Because clarity does not grow well inside panic. It grows inside calmness. When your mind relaxes internally, you begin seeing situations differently. Problems that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Emotions that once controlled you lose some of their intensity. You stop reacting to every thought as if it is an emergency. And slowly, your relationship with yourself changes. You stop trying to force healing overnight. You stop demanding certainty from every moment. You stop punishing yourself for being human. Instead, you begin allowing life to move naturally while still taking steady action where it matters. And this creates real peace. Not fake positivity, not emotional numbness, but grounded inner calmness. The kind of calmness that comes from no longer fighting every moment internally. And once you experience this shift, you realize something life-changing. Peace was never hiding from you. It was waiting underneath all the pressure, all the overthinking, and all the force your mind kept creating every single day. And the moment you stop chasing peace with desperation and finally allow yourself to breathe, trust, and release the need to control everything, is the moment peace quietly begins finding its way back to you naturally. One of the biggest reasons people feel mentally exhausted is because the mind becomes addicted to control without realizing it. It starts believing that overthinking is protection, that worrying is responsibility, that constantly analyzing every possible outcome will somehow prevent pain, failure, or uncertainty. But instead of creating peace, this habit slowly traps the mind in stress. Because the more you try to control life emotionally, the less calm your inner world becomes. At first, it feels normal. You tell yourself you are just being careful, just planning ahead, just trying to avoid mistakes. But over time, your thoughts become excessive. You start replaying conversations repeatedly. You start imagining worst-case scenarios before anything has even happened. You start mentally preparing for problems that may never exist. And eventually, your mind never fully rests. Even in quiet moments, it keeps working, still predicting, still worrying, still trying to control the future. And this constant mental activity becomes exhausting. But here is the deeper truth most people never notice. Overthinking rarely creates real control. It only creates the illusion of control. Because no matter how much you think, you still cannot fully predict life. You cannot remove every uncertainty. You cannot force every outcome to happen exactly the way your mind wants. Yet the mind keeps trying. And that is where suffering grows. Because when control becomes an emotional addiction, uncertainty starts feeling dangerous. The mind becomes uncomfortable with not knowing. It becomes restless when answers are delayed. It starts demanding certainty before peace can exist. And that demand creates constant tension internally. You begin feeling like you must solve everything immediately. You feel pressure to always have clarity. You feel emotionally unsafe whenever life feels uncertain. And slowly, your nervous system stays trapped in survival mode. That is why many people feel mentally tired even when they are doing very little physically. Their exhaustion comes from non-stop internal control patterns. The mind keeps forcing itself to figure everything out. What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if things never change? And because these thoughts repeat constantly, the body begins reacting as if danger is always present. But most of the time, the danger is not happening in reality. It is happening inside thought. And this is why overthinking becomes so destructive. It disconnects you from the present moment completely. Instead of experiencing life directly, you begin experiencing life through fear-based mental simulations. You stop listening to reality clearly because your attention becomes trapped inside imagined outcomes. And eventually you become emotionally exhausted from carrying situations that have not even happened yet. But the mind believes it is helping you. That is the illusion. It tells you, if you just think a little more, you will finally feel safe. But safety never arrives because uncertainty is part of life. There will always be unknowns. There will always be things outside your control. And once you stop resisting this truth, something begins changing internally. You realize peace was never going to come from controlling everything. Peace comes from learning how to remain grounded even when everything is not fully certain. That realization is powerful, because now you stop trying to mentally force every answer. You stop treating uncertainty like an emergency. You stop exhausting yourself trying to predict every possible future. Instead, you begin focusing on what is actually within your control: your actions, your mindset, your response to situations, your presence in the current moment. And slowly, your nervous system begins calming down. Not because life suddenly becomes predictable, but because you stop demanding impossible levels of certainty from yourself. You begin allowing life to unfold without mentally fighting every unknown. And this creates emotional space. Space to breathe. Space to think clearly. Space to actually experience life instead of constantly defending yourself against imagined fear. And eventually you realize something life-changing. The mind was never protecting you through constant control. It was only exhausting you. And the moment you stop trying to control every possible outcome and finally learn to trust yourself enough to face life one moment at a time, is the moment your mind begins releasing the pressure it was never meant to carry alone. Most people spend their entire lives believing that progress only comes through pressure. They think if they relax mentally, they will fall behind. They believe calmness means laziness. so they stay trapped in constant urgency, constantly forcing themselves to think more, do more, worry more, and control more. But real progress does not happen when your mind is overwhelmed. Real progress begins when your mind finally becomes calm enough to see clearly, because clarity cannot grow properly inside chaos. When your thoughts are racing all the time, your awareness becomes narrow. You stop seeing situations accurately. Every problem feels bigger than it really is. Every delay feels threatening. Every uncertain moment feels like danger. And this emotional pressure slowly disconnects you from your natural intelligence. You begin reacting instead of responding. You begin forcing instead of understanding. You begin chasing instead of aligning. And that is why so many people feel exhausted even while trying to improve themselves. Their growth is being driven by fear, not awareness. But the moment your mind starts relaxing internally, something powerful happens. Your nervous system begins calming down. Your thoughts become less aggressive. You stop treating every moment like an emergency. And suddenly, the same life that once felt overwhelming begins looking different. Not because your external world changed immediately, but because your internal state changed first, and your internal state shapes how you experience reality. When the mind is calm, awareness expands. You begin noticing solutions instead of only problems. You begin hearing your intuition more clearly. You begin making decisions from understanding instead of panic. And this is why real progress often happens after people stop forcing everything emotionally. Because forcing creates resistance. Calmness creates flow. Think about moments in your life where answers appeared naturally after you stopped obsessing. Moments where clarity arrived once your mind finally relaxed. Moments where situations improved only after you stopped emotionally gripping them so tightly. That is not weakness. That is alignment. Because when you relax internally, you stop blocking yourself with fear-based thinking. Your energy stops fighting itself. Your mind becomes more open, more flexible, and more connected to the present moment. And from that state, better decisions naturally emerge. This is why peaceful people often seem more focused and effective. It is not because they have fewer problems. It is because they are no longer mentally drowning inside every problem. They can pause before reacting. They can think without panic. They can move steadily without emotional desperation. And that emotional stability creates power. Because calmness sharpens perception. You stop wasting energy trying to control every possible outcome. You stop creating imaginary battles in your mind. You stop forcing certainty before taking action. Instead, you begin trusting steady movement. And strangely, this is often when life starts flowing differently. Opportunities become easier to recognize. Your DT actions become more intentional. Your relationships become less emotionally chaotic because your mind is no longer clouded by constant tension. And this is the secret most people miss. Calmness is not the opposite of progress. It is what allows progress to happen sustainably. Pressure may create temporary movement, but peace creates clear direction. That is why some people stay busy for years but never truly move forward internally. Their actions are driven by panic, not clarity. They are running emotionally, but they do not know where they are going. But once your mind relaxes, you stop operating from survival mode. You stop chasing growth through fear. You begin growing through awareness. And awareness changes everything, because now your decisions become aligned instead of reactive. Your focus becomes intentional instead of scattered. Your energy becomes grounded instead of emotionally desperate. And over time, this calm internal alignment creates stronger progress than force ever could. Because life responds differently when your energy is no longer built on panic. And the moment you stop trying to pressure yourself into becoming successful, healed, or fulfilled, and finally allow your mind to relax enough to move with clarity, is the moment progress stops feeling like a battle and starts becoming something that flows naturally through who you are becoming. Most people believe life is what is exhausting them. They blame the stress, the pressure, the responsibilities, the uncertainty, the setbacks. And yes, life can absolutely be difficult, but many times the deepest exhaustion is not coming from life itself. It is coming from the constant battle happening inside your own mind. Because every single day, you are fighting yourself. You are fighting your emotions instead of understanding them. You are fighting your timing instead of trusting the process. You are fighting your current reality instead of learning how to move through it consciously. And over time, this internal resistance drains your energy more than anything happening externally. Think about how much pressure people secretly carry inside themselves. They pressure themselves to heal faster, to succeed faster, to become confident faster, to stop feeling pain immediately, and when those changes do not happen instantly, frustration appears. The mind starts saying, "Why am I still like this? Why am I not further ahead? Why can't I fix this already?" And without realizing it, you become your own source of emotional pressure. That is why, even when life becomes quiet externally, many people still feel restless internally. Because the battle never stopped. The mind keeps criticizing, forcing, comparing, and resisting every stage of the journey. And eventually, you stop feeling connected to yourself. You begin treating yourself like a problem that must constantly be fixed instead of a human being who is growing through difficult stages. And this creates deep exhaustion. Because growth cannot happen peacefully inside a mind that is constantly attacking itself. The more you resist your current state emotionally, the heavier everything becomes. Even simple challenges start feeling overwhelming because internally you are already carrying tension. That tension comes from self-conflict. One part of you wants peace. Another part keeps creating pressure. One part wants healing. Another part keeps demanding perfection immediately. And this internal contradiction keeps your nervous system trapped in stress. But the moment you stop fighting yourself, something begins changing. Not because your problems instantly disappear, but because your relationship with yourself becomes softer, calmer, and more aware. You begin realizing that healing takes time. Growth takes time. Understanding yourself takes time. And suddenly, you stop treating every emotional struggle like personal failure. Instead of attacking yourself for feeling lost, you begin listening to yourself more honestly. Instead of forcing emotions away, you begin understanding what they are trying to teach you. And this awareness creates emotional space. Space to breathe without guilt. Space to grow without panic. Space to exist without constantly feeling behind. That shift changes everything internally. Because now, your energy is no longer being wasted in constant self-resistance. You stop arguing with your reality every moment. You stop demanding impossible perfection from yourself. And from that, calmer state, healing actually becomes easier. This is the strange truth most people eventually discover. The harder you fight yourself emotionally, the longer transformation takes. But the moment you stop creating internal war, growth begins unfolding more naturally. Because now your mind feels safer. You stop waking up every day trying to fix yourself aggressively. Instead, you begin focusing on small, consistent progress with patience, and that patience creates stability. You become less reactive emotionally, less desperate for immediate answers, less exhausted from trying to control every stage of life. And slowly, you start feeling connected to yourself again, not perfect, not completely healed, but no longer at war with who you are in this moment. And that alone creates powerful change. Because the moment you stop treating yourself like an enemy and finally allow yourself to grow with awareness instead of constant pressure is the moment life stops feeling like something you must survive and starts becoming something you can actually move through with peace. One of the most powerful things a person can learn is how to let go emotionally without giving up spiritually, mentally, or physically. Because most people misunderstand letting go. They think it means becoming weak. They think it means losing ambition. They think it means no longer caring. But real letting go is not about giving up on your future. It is about releasing the emotional grip that is destroying your peace in the present. Because many people are not exhausted from effort itself. They are exhausted from emotional attachment to outcomes. They are carrying fear, urgency, pressure, and desperation inside every goal, every relationship, every decision. And over time, that emotional weight becomes unbearable. You begin needing constant reassurance, constant certainty, constant signs that things are working. And when those signs do not appear fast enough, panic begins growing inside the mind. That panic creates resistance. Because instead of flowing with life, you start fighting reality emotionally. You begin trying to control timing, control outcomes, control people, control every unknown situation. And the more tightly you grip life, the heavier it becomes. This is why letting go creates space for transformation. The moment you release emotional desperation, your mind begins breathing again. Not because all your problems disappear, but because your energy stops being trapped inside constant fear. You stop trying to force answers immediately. You stop needing certainty every second. You stop emotionally collapsing every time life moves, slowly, and suddenly, there is space inside you again. Space for clarity, space for healing, space for awareness. Because transformation cannot fully happen inside a mind overwhelmed by pressure. Think about how difficult it is to hear your intuition when your thoughts are screaming constantly. Think about how hard it is to make wise decisions when fear is controlling your emotions. Emotional attachment clouds perception. You stop seeing reality clearly because your mind becomes obsessed with controlling outcomes. But when you let go emotionally, something powerful shifts. You begin focusing less on forcing results and more on becoming aligned internally. You stop measuring your worth based on how quickly life changes externally. You stop treating every delay as proof that you are failing, and this creates calmness. Not passive calmness, not laziness, but grounded emotional stability. The kind of stability that allows you to continue moving forward without mentally destroying yourself in the process. Because letting go does not mean you stop taking action. You still work, you still grow, you still pursue what matters to you. But now your actions are no longer driven by desperation. They are driven by awareness and trust. And trust changes everything internally. You stop trying to control every future moment. You begin understanding that some things unfold naturally only when you stop emotionally interfering with them constantly. This is why many breakthroughs happen after people finally release pressure mentally. Once the mind relaxes, clarity appears. Once fear loosens its grip, new possibilities become visible. And suddenly, life begins flowing differently. Your decisions become calmer. Your emotions become more stable. Your energy becomes lighter. Because you're no longer carrying the exhausting burden of trying to force life into perfect certainty. Instead, you begin allowing growth to happen gradually. And gradual growth is powerful because it lasts. You begin healing naturally instead of aggressively. You begin trusting the process instead of attacking yourself during every difficult stage. You begin realizing that transformation was never about controlling everything perfectly. It was about creating enough inner space for growth to finally happen. And the moment you stop gripping every outcome with fear and finally allow yourself to move through life with trust, patience, and emotional freedom is the moment transformation quietly begins unfolding inside you in ways force never could create. Life begins changing in a completely different way when you stop moving through it with force and start moving through it with trust. Because force and trust create two completely different experiences internally. Force is built on fear. Trust is built on awareness. Force says, everything must happen now or something is wrong. Trust says, I will continue moving forward, even when everything is not fully clear yet. And most people spend years trapped inside force without realizing it. They force themselves emotionally every single day. They force answers, force certainty, force healing, force progress, force outcomes. And because of that constant pressure, they never fully experience peace. Their mind is always tense, always checking, always worrying, always trying to control what comes next. And eventually, they become exhausted, not because they are weak, but because the human mind was never designed to carry constant emotional force. That is why trust becomes transformational. Because trust relaxes the nervous system. It allows your energy to stop fighting itself. It creates emotional stability in the middle of uncertainty, and uncertainty is something no one can fully escape. There will always be unknowns in life. There will always be delays. There will always be moments where the future is unclear. But when you move with force, uncertainty feels unbearable. The mind treats it like danger. It demands immediate answers before allowing peace to exist, and this creates constant internal struggle. You begin feeling like you must solve your entire future immediately. You pressure yourself to always know exactly what to do. You become emotionally attached to controlling every outcome, but control is limited. And once you stop fighting that truth, your life begins changing quietly from the inside. You start understanding that trust is not passive. Trust still moves. Trust still takes action. Trust still shows discipline and consistency. But trust no longer carries panic inside every step. That is the difference. When you move with trust, your actions become calmer. Your mind becomes clearer. Your energy stops leaking into fear-based overthinking. You stop chasing certainty emotionally and begin focusing on steady movement instead. And this changes your entire relationship with growth. Because now, you no longer need instant proof that everything is working. You stop emotionally collapsing every time progress feels slow. You stop treating temporary uncertainty like permanent failure. Instead, you begin understanding that some things take time to unfold. Some lessons take time to understand. Some healing takes time to settle. Some growth happens invisibly before it becomes visible externally. And trust allows you to continue moving even during those invisible stages. That is powerful, because most people quit emotionally long before life has a chance to transform them. They become overwhelmed by impatience. They lose themselves trying to force timing instead of trusting the process. But once trust begins replacing force, something changes internally. You breathe differently. You think differently. You react differently. You stop treating every difficult moment like proof that life is against you. You begin seeing challenges as part of the process instead of signs that everything is falling apart. And this awareness creates resilience, not fake positivity, not denial, but grounded emotional strength. The kind of strength that allows you to keep moving without panic controlling your mind every day. And over time, this calm consistency becomes more powerful than force ever was. Because force burns energy quickly, trust preserves it. Force creates emotional chaos. Trust creates direction. And eventually, you realize something life-changing. Your breakthrough was never waiting for you to pressure yourself harder. It was waiting for you to stop fighting life long enough to finally move with patience, awareness, alignment, and trust. And the moment you stop trying to force every answer, every outcome, and every stage of your journey is the moment life finally begins unfolding in a way that feels less like survival and more like becoming the person you were always growing into. And the moment you stop forcing every outcome and start moving through life with trust, patience, and inner calmness is the moment everything that once felt blocked finally begins opening naturally.